asakta buddhi sarvatra jitatma vigata sprihah naishkarmya siddhim paramam Sannyasenadhigacchati. Naishkarmya siddhim paramam Sannyasenadhigacchati. Shloka 49 is in many ways the concluding portion of a very important segment of the 18th chapter. Sanyāsasya mahabaho tattvam veditum tyagasya cha rishikesha pratakvedi keshi nishodhana. Thus begins the chapter. Arjuna wanted to know all about sannyasa and tyaga. This is how the 18th chapter begins. 18th chapter, as we all know, is the summary of all summaries. While tyaga is central to Gita, tyaga also happens to be the key ingredient in the 18th chapter. Sannyasa and tyaga are very well explained right at the beginning of the 18th chapter. And we have seen tyaga is central to transmuting every action into a liberating action. Action, karma, by design is binding in nature. Every action has a binding consequence. This is the design of karma. How do we transmute such an action and make it liberating in nature? We have seen that we cannot avoid doing actions. Act we must. We are compelled to perform actions every day that we live. When we talk about actions, they are physical and they are mental. So, actions per se are inescapable. If actions are inescapable, and if actions by design are binding in nature, then what is the way out of samsara? And Krishna categorically declares that the way out of samsara is to build every action on the foundation of tyaga. Therefore, tyaga is central to transforming a binding action into a liberating action. The action remains the same. The action remains the same, but the attitude with which the action is done changes, transforms. Thus, a mundane action becomes liberating in nature. Tyaga is our capability to trade the present pleasure for future treasure. Let me repeat it. Tyaga is our capability to trade the present pleasure for future treasure, to trade the present sense gratification for future supreme satisfaction. Therefore, tyaga is a very critical ingredient in every action that we perform. If an action is not built on the foundation of tyaga, renunciation, then it is necessarily binding. And that is the reason why in the summary of all summaries, Krishna spends a lot of time discussing the nature of tyaga, the significance of tyaga, significance of renunciation. Ishvare kartrita buddhihi sattvopadeyatantime swakarma parinamascha Shastra Sarartha Uchyate. This is the summary shloka of the 18th chapter. Ishvare Kartrita Buddhihi. Kartrutva Tyaga. Krishna, while talking about Tyaga throughout the Gita, at many times, he talks about the importance of Kartrutva Tyaga, renunciation of doership. Doing actions with a firm awareness of the reality that the ultimate doer is Krishna. We are all contributory doers. We are not the sole doers. We contribute. But Krishna is the ultimate doer. Ishvare Kartrita Buddhihi. This awareness is fundamental. This awareness that Bhagavan is the ultimate doer is fundamental to transforming our actions and making it liberating in nature. Ishvare Kartrita Buddhihi. Sattvopa Deyatantime. The significance of cultivating Sattva Guna is also discussed in detail throughout the 18th chapter. Ishvare Kartrita Buddhihi Sattvopa Deyatantime. Swakarma Parinamascha. Swakarma Parinama. The karma that we do, the action that we do, the Swadharma, the Parinama, when it transforms into Kainkarya, the effect, the consequence is not binding but liberating. Swakarma Parinamascha Shastra Sarartha Uchyate, the very essence of all Shastras. So these are the principal topics in the 18th chapter. Now, Shlokas 48 and 49 bring about the conclusion of the topic Swakarma Parinamascha. From Shloka 50 onwards, Shastra Sarartha, the very essence of all Shastras, we will dive in from Shloka 50 onwards. So today, we will conclude that segment of the 18th chapter where Krishna talks about Karma Yoga, the very essence and the foundation of Karma Yoga, which is Tyaga, which is attaining the supreme state. Sanyāsa is very clearly explained throughout the Gita. Sanyāsa, Naishkarmya, these are terms that Krishna uses right from the 3rd chapter. Now we need to quickly refresh our memories so that we are very clear about what Krishna is talking about. Sanyāsa that Krishna talks about is not renouncing the world. Sanyāsa is not about renouncing the world. Sanyāsa is renouncing the attachment to the world. It is not about rejecting the world, it is about encompassing the world. No, to avoid entanglement in the world, we don't need to reject it. We can very much engage with the world and still attain liberation. This is the beauty of Gita, where it reconciles two seemingly conflicting paths. The path of complete renunciation of the world and the path of engagement with the world. They may seem very contradictory in nature. We may always ask this question, how can I keep engaged in the world, keep doing the work that I do without changing the nature of my work? I stay engaged with the world, but I still avoid getting entangled with the world. This is the beauty of Gita, where it brings about reconciliation. And by reconciling these two seemingly contradictory paths, Krishna gives us the formula in the form of Karma Yoga. In many ways, the first 49 shlokas of the 18th chapter is giving us a conclusive essence of Karma Yoga and the practice of Karma Yoga. That is why Krishna deals with Tyaga, Sanyāsa, the art and science of renunciation. Then he immediately goes into analyzing the action. We saw how Krishna deeply dives into action, looks at every facet of action, and then analyzes various components, and then looks at classifying them based on the 3 gunas. He analyzes the factors of action. He then analyzes the people, the types of people who do various kinds of actions. This is where Varana Dharma comes in. And then he concludes with 48 and 49, he concludes the topic of Karma Yoga, essentially making the transition now into Bhakti Yoga. So from Shloka 50 onwards, he will transition from Karma and Jnana into Bhakti, and then eventually to Prapatti, which becomes the essence of all the Shastras. So Shloka number 48 and 49 are concluding shlokas of the first segment of the Gita. Sahajam karma kaunteya. Sahajam karma. With every karma, there is something which is born along with every karma, he says. Every action that we do in this world, along with it, some kind of a defect is always there. Every action, every activity has something which is unpleasant, has some blemish, has some distress in it, has something which is not pleasant to us. Sahajam karma kaunteya. Sadosham apinat tajet. Just because an activity that we do has some defect, is unpleasant, we cannot avoid doing that action here, Arjuna, he says. What is important here to understand is when we perform actions which are aligned with our nature, with our swabhava, that becomes our swadharma. Krishna explains the principle of swadharma. What is swadharma? My dharma. Dharma, the duty that I do, which is aligned with my nature, with my swabhava. Not my swarupa, my swabhava. Swarupa is the nature, swabhava is characteristic. My temperament, my attitude. When my actions are aligned with my temperament, aligned with my actions, that becomes my swadharma. And Krishna recommends that we need to perform actions that are aligned with our temperament, aligned with our attitude. Only then those actions can lead to our spiritual elevation and growth. If we do not do actions that are aligned with our nature, there is always going to be conflict in the mind. We are not going to be at peace. If we are not peaceful, if the mind is not at rest, there can be no spiritual elevation. So the fundamental prerequisite for us to progress spiritually is to do swadharma. Even if the duty that we perform has some defects, has some unpleasantness. So Krishna is preparing Arjuna for the war. Engaging in war is not easy. Engaging in a war, for a warrior, engaging in a war means killing people. And that is very unpleasant, very distressful. Krishna is preparing Arjuna for this. He says, hey Arjuna, sahajam karma kaunteya sadosham apinatyajet. Just because there is unpleasantness in the work that you do, you cannot abandon it. You must engage. Sarvarambahi doshena dhumenagnir ivavritaha. He gives a beautiful analogy. Dhumenagnir ivavritaha. Fire is very auspicious. We all need fire. Various forms of fire are needed to cook, to stay warm. Fire is very auspicious and therefore we need fire. But then with fire comes smoke, unavoidable, inescapable. We cannot avoid smoke which is naturally with fire. So therefore, we need to learn to deal with fire expertly so that we can avoid the smoke and use the fire without getting disturbed and distressed. We cannot renounce an action just because there is unpleasantness. If we have to do that, then we cannot live. Just reflect on this for a moment. The very act of breathing has unpleasantness in its very design. When we breathe, knowingly or unknowingly, we end up killing thousands of microbes. The farmer who cultivates the land ends up killing millions of microorganisms. The farmer cannot give up on farming because there is unpleasantness. We cannot give up breathing because there is a defect in the act of breathing. There is a purpose for every defect in every act. So Krishna says, this world, we cannot be looking at perfection in this world because the world is a product of the three gunas. Perfection is only when we transcend the three gunas. Within the realm of three gunas, we can only strive for perfection. We can only strive for perfection. Perfection can be a goal that we can strive for, but attainment of that perfection can only happen when we transcend the three gunas. Until then, we have to put up with imperfections. We can always compare our growth. I have to be better today than my yesterday. But then, I cannot dream of becoming 100% perfect as long as I am still in this world, because I am still product of three gunas. Sattva, Rajas and Tamas are always, I am always an admixture of all the three, and everything that I do is a product of the three gunas. So therefore, whether we like it or not, we have to acknowledge and accept imperfection in the actions that we do. We have to acknowledge and accept defects, unpleasantness in everything that we do. So therefore, when we say this world is a dukkhalaya, this world is dukkhalaya, therefore I will turn away from it, is not practical. Samsara is no doubt dukkhalaya, this world is no doubt dukkhalaya, but it is not only dukkhalaya. There is a lot more to it. Therefore, we cannot conclude that this is dukkhalaya, therefore I will stop engaging with it. Now, renouncing actions, abandoning actions because of unpleasantness is not coming out of illumination, it actually comes out of illusion. Because if there is spiritual illumination, we understand that every action by design has some blemish, has some defect. Only when we are deluded and when we are in illusion, we think there is perfection possible, and we may always think of renouncing something which we are very unpleasant to do, and we are always looking at something else which is better. Krishna says that is why doing your swadharma, even if it is unpleasant, is better than attempting to do your paradharma. There is this famous phrase or saying, which we always keep using it. The grass is always greener on the other side. There is a huge flaw in this statement. Why should we say the grass is always greener on the other side? After all, why do we need grass? We are not animals. So whether the grass is greener on the other side or not, how does it matter to us? The moment we say grass is greener on the other side, we are actually chasing the wrong things. This is exactly the problem when we start looking at paradharma, dharma which is not aligned to my innate nature. If my swabhava is not mapped to the actions that I do, and if I'm always trying to do something which is not aligned to my swabhava, I end up A, not doing the action properly, B, I also end up accumulating a sense of confusion, eventually, which will stop me from engaging productively from anything that I do. So all the problems that we have in the work that we do, all the ills, if we were to kind of find the root cause is the conflict between the nature of the work that we do and our swabhava. Only when this alignment happens, then we actually enjoy what we do. That is why it is very important for us to learn to love what we need to do before trying to do what we love to do. We have to learn loving what we need to do before trying to do what we love to do. In anything that we do, there are preferences, there are obligations. In any work that we do, very important to understand this. Preferences, obligations. Preferences are what I love to do. Obligations are what I need to do. Whether we like it or not, preferences and obligations come as an inseparable package. What we need to do may not be lovable, we may not like, but we still need to do. Even when I choose a profession or an occupation which I love, even that comes along with it obligations that I may not like. I may choose to be a professional writer because I love writing. So my preference is writing. But then even a writer has obligations. He needs to market his product. He needs to do things. He needs to engage with the printer. He may not love doing these activities, but these are obligations. So any preference always comes with an obligation. Both of them are a package that comes. We cannot resist our obligations. When we resist and resent our obligations, we are disempowered. And how do we stop this disempowerment? Only when we recognize that the obligations are a prerequisite for us to successfully engage in our preferences. It's a prerequisite. If we have to, even in our lives, if we have to engage doing things that we love, we need to necessarily learn loving things that we need to do. Fire connotes our preferences. Smoke connotes our obligations. Both come together, unavoidable. We have to learn loving our obligations so that by doing the obligations, we can enjoy doing what we love. So this is what Krishna says when he talks about every action by design having a defect, unpleasantness, which means every occupation, every profession, any activity that we do always comes with certain obligations which are unavoidable. That is why he says, hey Arjuna as a Kshatriya, he loves winning the war. There is a kick in winning the war. But winning the war comes with lives, killing people. There is unpleasantness there. You have to be prepared for that. So Arjuna is being prepared to perform his duty, and thus Krishna in the 48th Shloka very clearly lays down the formula. He says, hey Arjuna, be prepared. Be prepared to accept what is unpleasant, what you think as seemingly defective, only by accepting it, only by tolerating it. How do we go beyond tolerating the unpleasantness? How do we go beyond tolerating our obligations? Yes, we need to tolerate them. But then toleration alone is not enough. We have to look at it with the right perspective. When we understand the purpose of what we are doing, when we engage in any activity, if there is a higher purpose to the action that we are doing, then we do not just tolerate the obligations, we start to see the obligations in the right perspective. Then we start doing both the preferences and obligations as a service to Krishna. And in that process, we fulfill the higher purpose of doing every action. To begin with, we may be very uncomfortable with what is unpleasant. I may not be very comfortable in doing certain parts of the activity that I am engaged in. They may be very unpalatable, may not be aligned with what I would be comfortable with. But then when I see it in the perspective of the higher purpose of the overall activity, then I realize that this is unavoidable and I take it along with what I love doing. And I offer both to Krishna as service, and in that process, I attain fulfillment. Thus, how do I go about doing this? This is the question. So therefore, Krishna in Shloka 49 talks about how we go about doing this particular way of doing the actions. Asakta buddhis sarvatra chitatma vigataspruhaha. Asakta buddhis sarvatra. He gives 3 dimensions to sannyasa, 3 dimensions to total and complete renunciation. What are the 3 dimensions? Asakta buddhis sarvatra, number 1. Jitatma, number 2. Vigataspruhaha, number 3. When he talks sanyasena adhigacchati, sanyasena, by practicing sanyasa, total renunciation. How do I practice total renunciation? To those 3 means. One is asakta buddhis sarvatra, completely staying detached in all situations, under all circumstances. That is why he adds, he says not only asakta buddhihi, he says asakta buddhis sarvatra, he says. Under all circumstances, in all situations, my buddhi remains unattached to the world. Asakta buddhis sarvatra. Jitatma. Jitatma, conquering the lower self, which is nothing but the mind, conquering the mind. The one who stays totally detached under all circumstances, the one who conquers, who not only controls the mind but conquers the mind. And 3, vigataspruhaha, one who enjoys freedom, complete freedom from all spruha. Spruha, it means craving. Our vasanas manifest as spruha. Spruha manifests as ichcha. Ichcha then manifests as trishna. So when we talk about desire, kama, there are 4 forms. At the subtlest form of kama is vasana. Subtle form, it's latent. Vasanas are in a very, very subtle form. And these vasanas manifest as spruha, cravings. Cravings for sense pleasure. When the cravings become strong and we start looking at ishta prapti, anishta nivritti, what I want, what I like, I want to get what I like, I want to avoid what I don't like, it becomes ichcha. And this ichcha, when it becomes very, very strong, it becomes trishna. So kama has 4 dimensions. So when Krishna here talks about vigata spruha, he is talking of all the 4. Vigata vasana, vigata spruha, vigata ichcha, vigata trishna. No, here all these are vasana, spruha, ichcha, trishna for vishaya, for the world, not for Krishna. No, essentially, here Krishna is talking about the disease of samsara. What is the disease of samsara? We are all patients. Whether we realize it or not, we are eternal patients as long as we are in samsara. We may think we are very healthy, but we all have sickness. And what is the sickness? Misdirected desires. That's our sickness. Misdirected desires. Our desires are directed towards the world. In material existence, we are all patients. Now, being patients, we are always consuming medicines all the time. Medicines broadly can be categorized into two categories: palliatives and curatives. Palliatives is painkillers. Curatives means it cures the disease. No, a painkiller or a palliative will only treat the symptom, will not address the root cause. But we are very comfortable with consuming palliatives all the time because we want all quick results. When we engage with the world and we experience temporary pleasures, it's like taking a painkiller, palliative. Temporary pleasure will only cause long-term problems. They will not address the root cause. The root cause, the illness of samsara, is not addressed by experiencing these temporary pleasures. Curatives are experiencing eternal pleasures. When we realize our relationship with Krishna, which is eternal, and when we start to experience that, that is the curative for samsara. That addresses the root cause of the ills of samsara. So here, Krishna is talking about only when all these three dimensions of renunciation, the first being ability to renounce completely under all circumstances. Second, ability to master one's mind. Third is ability to master one's desires. When we say master one's desires, it's not killing desires. It is impossible to kill desires. Mastering desires is essentially changing the direction of the desires. Etan api tu karmani sangam tyaktva phalani cha kartavyani me partha nischitam matamuttamam, Krishna says. What is Krishna's verdict? Krishna earlier in the 18th chapter gives his verdict. Etan api tu karmani sangam tyaktva phalani cha kartavyani me partha nischitam matamuttamam. Hey Arjuna, let me give you my verdict. So Krishna is so very compassionate. He gives his verdict and he then tells Arjuna, it is now up to you to decide. He gives us the directives, he gives us the Shastra and he says, it's up to you. Look, now he says, what is his verdict? His verdict is Nischitam Matamuttamam. Nischita, what is his conclusive verdict? Etana pitu karmani sangam tyaktva palanicha. Sangam tyaktva palanicha. Kartavyani me. Do your duty, which is based on the principle of renunciation and detachment from the results. Now, what is this duty? We saw that the duty is essentially threefold in nature. Throughout the Gita, and especially the first part of the Gita, 18th chapter, Krishna talks about any karma becomes a duty, any action becomes a duty only when it follows the three principles, the principles of yajna, dana, tapas. Seems familiar, no? Remotely familiar possibly. Only a few months back we discussed. Three principles which determine what stands for duty. Any work that we do can be called a duty only when it adheres to this threefold formula. What is yajna? Yajna is contributory selfless work aligned to a higher cause. If we need to define yajna, yajna can be defined as contributory selfless work aligned to a higher cause. That is yajna. Any action that we do has to be contributory in nature. We need to understand we are only contributors. We don't determine the scope of the action nor the result of the action. We only contribute. And through contribution, we also need to understand that neither the action completely belongs to us nor the result completely belongs to us. So selfless contributory action aligned to a higher cause, we need to see a purpose in everything that we do, a higher purpose. That is yajna. What is dana? Practice of benevolent giving. This is dana. Every action that we do, dana is not just charity that we do or donation that we give. That is one part of dana. Every action that we do, there is an ingredient of dana as part of the action. Benevolence, large-heartedness. In whatever action that we do, there has to be giving. And we all know we can only give if we have. We can give only what we have. But there is also a greater reality that we need to realize. While we can give only what we have, the greater reality is in giving, we can have. Therefore, the more we give, the more we will have. So, dana is a very crucial ingredient to every action that we do. Yajna, dana, tapas. Tapas is simply put ethical purification and aligning our thought, word and deed. So therefore, any action becomes a duty, kartavya, duty, only when it follows these three principles of yajna, dana, tapas. Etanyapitu karmani sangam tyaktva palani cha kartavyani me partha nishchitam matam uttamam. Nishchitam matam. It may seem difficult when we are practicing this performance of this duty based on the principle of yajna, dana and tapa, because it may seem that we are doing the same action. How come the same action? Just by adding these three ingredients can become liberating in nature. It's like this beautiful process of metamorphosis. A caterpillar keeps weaving its cocoon, goes on weaving its cocoon, builds its cocoon. As long as it's building its cocoon, it's very unpleasant, not easy. It is preparing itself. The weaving of the cocoon is this transformation process of karma becoming duty, becoming kainkarya. So this weaving of the cocoon cannot stop. The caterpillar cannot disengage from it. Only when it goes on weaving the cocoon, slowly and steadily, there is a transformation happening. This ugly caterpillar is transforming into a beautiful butterfly. Similarly, when we are engaged in performing karma yoga based on the three principles of yajna, dana and tapa, there is definitely some unpleasantness. There is definitely some distress. There is definitely something with which we are not comfortable. But just like how a caterpillar must not abandon weaving the cocoon, we cannot abandon doing our actions, which are the only means to elevate us, only means to purify us. And by performing this, without us possibly even being conscious of it, we are all cultivating inner beauty. That transformation is happening, and it's just a matter of time before we can start soaring into the sky, flying high in all glory. And that is what Krishna here is talking about. He says, asakta buddhis sarvatra jitatma vigatasprihaha naishkarmya siddhim paramam. Naishkarmya siddhi. What do we attain? Sanyasena adhigacchati. Through performing sannyasa, total renunciation based on these three principles, one attains the successful state. What is that successful state? Krishna calls that successful state Naishkarmyam. Naishkarmya siddhi. Paramam. The supreme state of Naishkarmya. If we translate Naishkarmya, we get actionlessness. But unfortunately, Naishkarmya is not actionlessness, because then it goes against the very recommendation of Krishna in the Gita. Krishna has never recommended actionlessness. Naishkarmya, karma can mean action. Karma can also mean reaction. So Naishkarmya is not actionlessness. Naishkarmya is reactionlessness. A state where we continue to perform actions, but we do not accumulate reactions. Karma has to be continued to be performed. When we say we continue to perform karma, now only difference is the motivation that drives the performance of karma changes. Until yesterday, the motivation for performing karma was bodily gratification. From today, the motivation for performing karma is love for Krishna. This change in the motivation, Naishkarmya, is reaching a state where I continue to perform the same action. The actions that I do, I continue to do the same duty. In whatever stage of life I am, I do not need to change the ingredients of the work that I do, but I change the motivation that drives by realizing the higher purpose. I realize the higher purpose of my life and living. When I realize that higher purpose, automatically the motivation changes. My love for Krishna grows, and that love is what drives the action that I perform. And when I perform action with love for Krishna, I reach a state of reactionlessness. My actions continue. I stop accumulating reactions. Reactions are my karma vasanas, which essentially when I reach that state of not accumulating vasanas, I am now getting ready for taking the exit out of samsara. So that is why Krishna concludes this segment of transformation of work. We can look at the first 49 shlokas of the 18th chapter as how do we transform every action that we do, irrespective of the nature of the action. Simple formula of transforming the work that we do into a vehicle for liberation, preparing ourselves for liberation. And when we do this transformation and reach that state of naishkarmya, we stop. That is where purification starts to happen. We are in an elevated stage, and then we are in a state where we become more and more aware of our own nature. Karma Yoga leads to a state of Atma Sakshatkara. The first 6 chapters of the Gita, Krishna concludes by enabling Arjuna reach a state of Atma Sakshatkara. In a way, the 49 shlokas of the 18th chapter reaches a state of Naishkarmya Siddhi, a state where I am blissfully aware of my own nature, of my own identity. Because why? Now, every action that I do, the results do not dictate my identity. My self-worth, my self-identity are not defined by the results of my action. The biggest challenge that we have in our day-to-day lives is we let the results of our actions determine our self-worth. We let the results of our actions determine our self-identity. And this is where we get trapped. The moment we delink this, the moment we know that our identity and self-worth have nothing to do with the results. We do care about results. But why do we care about results? Because we care for Krishna, to whom we are offering our results. That is why we care for results. We do not care for results for the sake of results, because we are offering the results to Krishna, and we care for Krishna. Because we care for Krishna, we care for the offering that we make to Krishna. And in the process, we also know that Krishna cares more for what is there in our heart, the content of our heart, and not the product of our work. This gives us the security. We are emotionally secure in every action that we do because we know that He loves us irrespective of the result of any action. And in that process, we enjoy and love what we do. And when we learn to love what we need to do, we are well prepared to continue to do what we have always loved. And in this process, we prepare ourselves for the next and most important stage of Paramatma Sakshatkara. Shastra Sarartha Uchyate. From Shloka 50 onwards, Krishna gives the summary of the remainder of the 12 chapters of the Gita, where we take the leap from Atma Sakshatkara to Paramatma Sakshatkara. We take the leap from karma to kainkarya. We take the leap from knowing about Krishna to knowing Krishna, bhakti, prapatti, and eventually conclusion of the Gita Shastra in the next set of shlokas starting from 50. 50 to the end of Gita are very, very significant. I recommend not to miss any shloka, not to miss any word of any shloka, irrespective of where you are in whatever part of the world. Do not miss the next set of shlokas, the most conclusive part of the Gita. So therefore, stay connected, stay tuned. Sarvam Sri Krishna Arpanamastu.